The December wind bit through Miriam Alcott's woolen cloak as she stepped off the stagecoach, her boots sinking into the fresh snow that blanketed Black Hollow's single street. She was 29 years old, though the lines around her eyes suggested a woman who'd lived longer than her years. Her hands, rough from factory work, gripped the handle of a worn leather trunk, everything she owned in the world. The driver, a weathered man with tobacco-stained teeth, hefted her second bag from the coach roof. "Sure you want to stop here. Miss ain't much in Black Hollow, but cold winters and suspicious folks." "That'll do fine," Miriam said, her voice deeper than most expected from a woman. It was one of many things about her that drew stares, that and her height, the breadth of her shoulders, the way she could lift a flour sack as easily as any man. The driver shrugged and climbed back to his perch as the coach rolled away, leaving deep ruts in the snow. Miriam stood alone on the wooden sidewalk, surveying her new home. Black Hollow pressed against the base of pine-covered mountains, a collection of weathered buildings that seemed to huddle together against the cold. The general store, a saloon with frosted windows, a boarding house with smoke curling from its chimney, and a dozen other structures lined the muddy main street. She hadn't come looking for work. The textile mill back east had paid her final wages after an incident she preferred not to dwell on. She hadn't come looking for a husband either at her age, with her peculiarities. That ship had long sailed. All she wanted was a place to breathe, somewhere the whispers wouldn't follow, where she could wake without dreading the day ahead. A woman emerged from the general store, clutching a parcel to her chest. She paused, taking in Miriam's travel-worn appearance, then hurried past with lowered eyes. Through the saloon's grimy window, faces turned to stare. Miriam straightened her spine, a habit born from years of being looked at sideways. The boarding house was her first stop. Mrs. Henley, the proprietress, was a thin woman with gray hair pulled so tight it stretched her features. She looked Miriam up and down, her lips pursing. "Room and board's $2 a week, paid in advance, no men visitors after dark, no drinking, no loud talk." "I'm looking for something more permanent," Miriam said. "A cabin, perhaps, something outside town." "Mrs. Henley's eyebrows rose. "A woman alone in winter." "I can manage." The older woman studied her for a long moment. "The old Travers place sits empty, quarter-mile past the mill. Belonged to a trapper who died last spring. Nobody's wanted it too far from town, too close to the woods. Indians used to camp in those hills, though they've been gone 10 years or more." "Who owns it now?" "Bank does, Mr. Aldridge at the land office might rent it cheap, seeing as nobody else wants it." Miriam thanked her and made her way to the land office, a narrow building squeezed between the barber shop and the undertaker. Mr. Aldridge was a round man with pomaded hair and suspicious eyes. He leaned back in his chair when she explained what she wanted. "The Travers cabin, you sure about that, Miss Alcott? And yes, I'm sure. It's rough living out there, no neighbors for help. Gets mighty cold when the wind comes down from the mountains." "How much?" He named a price less than she'd expected, but his expression suggested he thought it still too much for a woman alone. She counted out the first month's rent from her small purse, watching his surprise when she didn't haggle. "Wood stove works, far as I know," he said, sliding a key across the desk. "Well's good too, but you'll need firewood. Supplies. Sure you wouldn't prefer a room in town?" "No, thank you." His shrug said it was her funeral. "Stop by Carlson's for supplies. Tell him I sent you, he'll give you a fair price." The general store smelled of pickles and leather and lamp oil. Mr. Carlson, a tall Swede with massive hands, helped her select what she'd need: flour, salt pork, beans, coffee, matches, lamp oil, soap. His wife, a small woman with kind eyes, added a jar of preserves to the pile. "Welcome gift," she said, speaking softly. "That cabin's been empty too long. Good to have someone living there again." It was the first genuine warmth Miriam had encountered, and she felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Mr. Carlson loaded her supplies onto a small wagon. I'll drive you out there. That trunk looks heavy. The road to the cabin was really just a track through the snow, winding between towering pines. The trees grew thicker as they climbed, their branches heavy with white. When they finally emerged into a small clearing, Miriam caught her breath. The cabin sat with its back to the forest, built from logs gone silver with age. It was small, one room. She guessed, with a stone chimney and a covered porch across the front. Snow drifted against the walls, and icicles hung from the eaves like teeth. But the roof looked sound, and the windows, though dirty, were intact. Old Travers built it solid. Mr. Carlson said, helping her unload. Lived here 20 years before his heart gave out. Found him sitting in his chair, peaceful as you please. He carried her trunk inside while she explored. The cabin was dusty but dry. An iron stove dominated one corner, its pipe disappearing through the roof. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a table and single chair in the center, shelves along another wall. Mouse droppings littered the floor, and cobwebs draped the corners, but nothing that couldn't be fixed with soap and effort. You'll need firewood. Mr. Carlson said, testing the stove's damper. I can send my boy out with a load, but it won't last the winter. Most folks hire someone to split wood regular-like. I can manage, Miriam said, though she wondered if that were true. She'd never split wood in her life. Mr. Carlson's expression was skeptical. There's a fellow does wood cutting for hire, Wade Callahan. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's reliable. Want me to send him around? Miriam hesitated. She'd come here to be alone, to avoid the complications that arose when people got too close. But frozen to death wouldn't solve anything either. Perhaps that would be wise, she admitted. After Mr. Carlson left, Miriam stood in the doorway of her new home, watching his wagon disappear into the trees. The silence was absolute. No factory whistles, no gossiping workers, no landlady's shrill voice through thin walls, just the wind in the pines and the distant cry of something wild. She spent the rest of the day cleaning, scrubbing years of neglect from the floorboards, beating dust from the thin mattress, washing windows until weak winter light struggled through. By evening, she had a fire crackling in the stove and her few belongings arranged on the shelves. Her spare dress hung from a peg. Her mother's Bible sat on the table, and the quilt she'd made during her last winter at home covered the narrow bed. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. The fire helped, but cold seeped through cracks she hadn't noticed in daylight. She made a simple supper of beans and salt pork, eating by lamplight while wind rattled the windows. Outside, something howled, wolf or wind. She couldn't tell. That night, lying in the narrow bed with the quilt pulled to her chin, Miriam listened to the cabin settling around her. Every creak made her start. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps on the porch. But gradually, the steady pop of cooling wood and the distant rustle of pine needles became a lullaby. She'd done it. Run as far as she could from the whispers, the pointing fingers, the incident at the mill that had finally broken her resolve to endure. Here in this lonely cabin, with snow beginning to fall again and mountains standing guard, she could be what she'd never been allowed before. Nobody special, nobody strange, just a woman who wanted to be left alone. Tomorrow she'd need to figure out the firewood situation, maybe venture back to town for forgotten supplies. But tonight, for the first time in months, Miriam Alcott fell asleep without dreading the dawn. The knock came 3 days later. Just as morning light touched the snow-covered clearing, Miriam had been struggling with the axe she'd found in the lean-to, her attempts at splitting wood producing more splinters than usable pieces. Her hands, already raw from scrubbing the cabin, stung with fresh blisters. She opened the door to find a man standing at the edge of the porch, hat in hand despite the cold. He was tall, taller than her, which was unusual with broad shoulders that stretched his worn coat. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his eyes were the color of autumn honey, amber in the morning light. His face bore the weathered look of someone who'd spent years under open sky, with lines that suggested he was perhaps 35, maybe 40. Miss Alcott. His voice was low, rough like creek stones. Tom Carlson said you might need wood split. Mr. Callahan. He nodded once. Behind him, she noticed a sturdy mare tied to a pine, saddlebags bulging with what looked like tools. Yes, I could use help, Miriam admitted, gesturing toward her pitiful pile of kindling. Though I should ask your price first. He glanced at the woodpile, then at her blistered hands, though his expression didn't change. $1 a cord, split and stacked. Takes about a day per cord, depending. It was fair she'd expected higher. How much do I need for winter? 4 cords, minimum. 5's better if you want to stay warm through March. The cost would eat into her savings, but freezing wasn't an option. When can you start? Now, if it suits you. Yes, that would be fine. Can I offer you coffee? After, maybe. He moved toward the woodpile with an economy of motion that spoke of years of physical work. From his saddlebags, he pulled a long-handled axe, its blade gleaming with care, and a wedge for the larger logs. Miriam retreated inside, but found herself drawn to the window. Wade Callahan worked with a steady rhythm that was almost hypnotic. He'd position a log, study it for a moment as if reading its grain, then bring the axe down in a clean arc. The wood split with satisfying cracks, falling into neat halves. No wasted motion, no hurried strikes. She tried to focus on her own tasks, mending a tear in her spare dress, organizing the supplies she'd bought, starting a pot of stew for lunch. But her eyes kept drifting to the window. There was something calming about watching him work, the predictable swing and split, the growing pile of cut wood. At noon, she stepped onto the porch. Mr. Callahan, would you care for some dinner? He paused mid-swing, lowering the axe. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cold. Just water, if you have it. She brought him a dipper from the bucket by the door. He drank deeply. Adam's apple working. Up close, she noticed a thin scar running through his left eyebrow, and that his hands, like hers, bore the calluses of long labor. Been doing this long? She asked. Since the war ended. He handed back the dipper. Thank you. That would make it nearly 15 years. She wanted to ask which side he'd fought for, where he'd come from, why he'd ended up in Black Hollow, but something in his manner discouraged questions. He returned to work without another word. By late afternoon, he'd split more wood than she'd managed in 3 days of trying. The pile stood neat and tall, bark side out to shed moisture, exactly as it should be. She'd read that in one of the homesteading guides she'd bought back east, but reading and doing were different things entirely. That's a good start, he said, shouldering his axe. I'll come back day after tomorrow, if that suits. Yes, that's fine. She hesitated. About payment, would you prefer it daily or when you're finished? A hot meal when I'm done each day would be enough. She blinked. That's Mr. Callahan. Your work is worth more than a meal. He looked at her directly for the first time since he'd arrived. Those amber eyes held depth she couldn't read. Money's not much use if a man freezes to death spending it. Hot food in winter's worth more than gold. Then at least let me pay half in cash as well, if it eases your mind. He moved to leave, but she found herself speaking. The stew's ready, if you'd care to stay. He paused at the porch steps, seeming to weigh something. Finally, he nodded. Appreciate it. Inside, she served him at the small table while she took the chair. He ate slowly, with the careful manners of someone who'd learned them late. The only sounds were the crack of the fire and the scrape of spoons on tin plates. This is good, he said eventually. Been a while since I had stew with actual vegetables in it. It's nothing fancy, just carrots and potatoes from Carlson's store. Fancy's not always better. When he finished, he rose and carried his plate to the wash bucket without being asked. Day after tomorrow, Then, "Mr. Callahan," she called as he reached the door. "Thank you for the wood." He touched his hat brim. "Ma'am." She watched him ride away, his figure dark against the white snow. The cabin felt emptier after he left, though she told herself that was foolish. She'd come here to be alone, hadn't she? 2 days later, he returned as promised. This time she was ready with coffee when he arrived. Strong and black in a blue enamel cup. He accepted it with what might have been surprise, warming his hands on the metal before drinking. The routine established itself without discussion. He'd arrive early, work through the morning, accept water at noon, continue until late afternoon. She'd invite him to stay for the evening meal. He'd accept. On his 4th visit, as he settled his horse, she noticed him favoring his left side. "Are you hurt?" The question came out sharper than intended, colored by years of tending factory injuries. "It's nothing. Mare spooked at a rabbit yesterday. Caught me against a fence post." "Let me see." He stilled. "I said it's nothing." "And I've heard men say that before they collapsed from blood loss." "Please." Something in her tone must have reached him. Reluctantly, he shrugged out of his coat and lifted his shirt. A purple bruise spread across his ribs. Ugly, but not dangerous. "Ribs aren't broken," she said, gently pressing the edges of the bruise. He tensed but didn't pull away. "But you should bind them." "Wait here." She returned with strips torn from an old petticoat. "Arms up." He obeyed, letting her wind the cloth around his torso. She worked quickly, efficiently, trying not to notice the other scars marking his skin, some old and silver, others newer, the body of a man who'd lived rough. "There, that should help." "You've done this before." It wasn't a question. "The mill where I worked, accidents happened." She turned away, busying herself with the wash bucket. "You should take it easy today. Work won't do itself." "Then work slower. No good to me if you collapse." Was that almost a smile? "Yes, ma'am." The next day brought snow, heavy and silent. Wade arrived later than usual, his hat and shoulders white with it. "Storm coming," he said, accepting his customary coffee. "Big one. From the look of the clouds. You have enough food laid in." "I think so. How can you tell about the storm?" He gestured toward the mountains. "See how the clouds sit low on the peaks, and the way the birds went quiet yesterday means heavy weather coming." "How long?" 2, 3 days maybe, sometimes a week if it's bad enough." A week trapped in the cabin. She'd survived worse the dormitory during the typhoid outbreak, when they'd been quarantined for 20 days. But that was with other people. Voices and warmth, even in misery. "I'll get extra wood split today," he said, reading something in her expression. "Stack it on the porch so you won't have to go to the pile." By evening, he'd built a wall of split logs under the porch roof, protected from the coming snow. As they ate beans and cornbread, the wind began to rise, whistling through the pines with a sound like grieving. "I should go," he said, though he glanced at the window where snow already fell thick. "Beat the worst of it." She knew she should let him leave. It wasn't proper, him being here so late. But propriety seemed fragile against the gathering storm. "Your horse could shelter in the lean-to," she heard herself say. "You could. That is, the storm's getting worse." He studied her face. "I'll make it home." "Of course." She felt foolish for suggesting it. "Be careful." At the door, he paused. From his coat pocket, he pulled something wrapped in cloth. "Almost forgot. Thought you might need this." It was a hunting knife in a leather sheath, the blade sharp and well-oiled. "I can't accept." "Not a gift, a loan. Until you get your own, woman alone should have a knife that works." He pressed it into her hands. "Storm like this brings out the hungry animals. Probably won't need it, but better to have it." After he left, she stood at the window watching his tracks fill with snow. Within minutes, they were gone, as if he'd never been there at all. She strapped the knife to her belt, the weight strange but reassuring. That night, as the storm howled around the cabin, she lay awake thinking about amber eyes and careful hands, about the way he'd tensed when she'd touched his bruised ribs. Not from pain, but from something else. Something she recognized because she felt it too, the wariness of someone who'd learned to be alone, who'd forgotten what gentle touch felt like. Tomorrow he wouldn't come, maybe not for days, depending on the storm. She told herself she was grateful for the solitude, for the chance to remember why she'd come here. But her hand kept finding the knife at her belt, and her thoughts kept drifting to a man who thought a hot meal was worth more than gold. The storm lasted 4 days. By the time it blew itself out, snow reached halfway up the cabin door, and Miriam had to dig her way to freedom with the coal shovel. The world outside was transformed pristine white in every direction. Pine branches bowed under their burden, the familiar landmarks of her small clearing erased. She was checking the water bucket, grateful the well hadn't frozen, when she saw a figure moving through the trees. Wade emerged from the forest leading his horse, both man and animal laboring through the deep drifts. He'd wrapped grain sacks around the mare's legs to protect against the snow. "Thought I'd check the roof," he said by way of greeting, as if 4 days hadn't passed. Heavy snow like this can damage the shingles. She wanted to ask if he'd really come just for the roof, but held her tongue. "I've got coffee on." While he climbed up to inspect the cabin's roof, she heated the leftover bean soup and sliced the last of her bread. She'd rationed carefully during the storm, but supplies were running low. A trip to town couldn't be postponed much longer. "Roof's holding fine," he reported, stomping snow from his boots at the door. "Travers built to last." They ate without much conversation, but it was a comfortable silence. She'd grown used to his quiet presence, the way he moved through space without disturbing it. When she cleared the plates, he didn't immediately rise to leave. "Roads to town won't be clear for days," he said. "If you need supplies, I could bring them next time I come." "I couldn't ask." "You're not asking, I'm offering." She made a list while he finished his coffee flour, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil, the necessary things. She counted out money from her dwindling purse, aware of his eyes on her careful accounting. "That enough?" she asked. "More than enough." He folded the bills without counting them. "Anything else? Something that's not necessary?" The question surprised her. She thought of the peppermint sticks in glass jars at Carlson's store, the bolts of calico she'd admired, the small luxuries she'd learned to live without. "No, just what's on the list." 2 days later, he returned with her supplies and more, along with the flour and salt pork. He'd brought dried apples, a small tin of tea, and a paper-wrapped parcel. "Mrs. Carlson insisted," he said gruffly, indicating the parcel. Inside was a knitted scarf, soft blue wool that felt like clouds between her fingers. Miriam's throat tightened. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness without expecting something in return. "I'll have to thank her next time I'm in town." She'd like that. Gets lonely for female company. She says her daughter's all married and moved away. As she put away the supplies, Wade remained at the table, turning his empty cup between his hands. There was something different about him today, a restlessness she hadn't seen before. "My place is about 3 miles north," he said suddenly. "Old hunting shack. Not much, but it keeps the weather out." She wasn't sure how to respond to this unprecedented sharing of information. That is, have you lived there long?" 7 years. Came here after..." He stopped, jaw tightening. "After Wyoming." Wyoming? She remembered the land advertisements she'd seen back east, the promises of free homesteads and new beginnings. But something in his voice suggested Wyoming hadn't been a beginning for him. "I came here after the mill," she offered, a careful trade of history. "There was an incident. Management didn't appreciate workers who spoke up about unsafe conditions, especially female workers." "That why your hands are scarred? The mill?" She looked down at her palms, the white lines from shuttle cuts and machinery accidents, among other things. Must have been bad to make you come this far. Far enough that the talk couldn't follow. She met his eyes. Sometimes distance is the only remedy. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without words. They were both runners, both refugees from lives that had become unbearable. The specifics didn't matter as much as the shared knowledge of what it meant to leave everything behind. That evening, as they ate cornbread and the last of the soup, snow began falling again. Lighter this time, lazy flakes that danced past the windows. Wade stayed later than usual, helping her shore up the woodpile on the porch, checking that the shutters were secure. "Temperature's dropping," he said, breath clouding in the cold air. "Going to be a hard freeze tonight." "I'll keep the fire going." He hesitated at the door, and she sensed he wanted to say something more. Finally, he just touched his hat. "Stay warm." After he left, she found he'd stacked extra wood by the stove, within easy reach. Such a small gesture, but it made her chest ache with something she couldn't name. The freeze he'd predicted arrived with a vengeance. She woke to find ice coating the inside of the windows, her breath visible in the frigid air. Despite the fire she'd maintained all night, the cold was bone deep, seeping through every crack and gap. She dressed in layers, both dresses, her heaviest stockings, the blue scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Still, she shivered as she coaxed the fire back to life. The water in the bucket had a skin of ice that she had to break. By afternoon, when Wade didn't appear, she began to worry. He'd said he would finish the last cord today. Had something happened? Was he ill? The thought of him alone in his hunting shack, possibly hurt or sick, gnawed at her. "Stop it," she told herself. "He's a grown man who's survived this long without your concern." But the worry persisted as afternoon faded toward evening. Just before dusk, she heard the slow clop of hooves through snow. She rushed to the window to see Wade's mare moving carefully up the path. But something was wrong. He sat hunched in the saddle, one arm pressed to his side. She was out the door before he'd even stopped, reaching up to steady him as he dismounted. His face was pale, tight with pain. "What happened?" "Ice. Horse slipped, threw me into a tree." His words came short, breathless. Might have cracked a rib. "Come inside. Careful now." She supported him into the cabin, feeling him lean more heavily than he'd want her to know. At the table, she helped him out of his coat, noting how he bit back a groan. "Let me see. It's not Wade." His given name slipped out without thought. "Please." His hand stilled on his shirt buttons. It was the first time she'd used his name, and they both knew it. Slowly, he finished unbuttoning and pulled the shirt aside. The left side of his ribs was already purple-black, the bruising worse than before. When she gently probed the area, he couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath. "Maybe cracked, maybe not, but you need proper binding." She was already moving, gathering her medical supplies. "And you're not riding home tonight." "I can't stay here. It wouldn't be proper." She turned on him, exasperation overcoming propriety. "What's proper about dying of cold because you're too stubborn to accept help? You stayed when you were injured. I'll stay on the floor by the fire." "I won't take your bed." "Then we'll both be stubborn fools freezing by the fire. Is that what you want?" They glared at each other across the small space. Finally, his shoulders sagged. "Just until the worst cold passes." She bound his ribs properly this time, trying not to notice the heat of his skin under her fingers, the way his breathing changed when she leaned close. When she finished, she helped him to the chair by the fire. "I'll heat soup," she said, needing the distance of ordinary tasks. "And make tea with honey. It'll help with the pain." As she worked, she was intensely aware of his presence in a way she hadn't been before. Perhaps it was the forced intimacy of the situation, him hurt and vulnerable, the night closing around the cabin like a fist. Or perhaps it was simply that in speaking his name, she'd crossed some invisible boundary. They ate by firelight, the lamp oil too precious to waste. In the flickering glow, his face looked younger. The hard edges softened. He caught her staring and she looked away, heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For the doctoring, for the meal, for not letting me be a fool. You'd have done the same." "Maybe, but it's been a long time since anyone cared enough to argue with me about it." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. She understood. It had been long for her, too long since anyone looked past her oddities, her unfeminine strength and low voice, to see someone worth caring about. "We should sleep," she said finally. "The cold will get worse before morning." She made him a pallet by the fire, piling on every spare blanket she owned. He protested, but she ignored him, constructing a nest that would keep him warm through the night. For herself, she kept only the quilt, wrapping it tight as she curled on the bed. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay listening to his breathing, the occasional shift as his ribs pained him, the pop and settle of logs in the stove. The cabin felt different with him in it, not smaller but fuller somehow, as if his presence had weight and substance that pressed against the walls. "Miriam." His voice came soft through the darkness. "Yes. That incident at the mill, were you hurt?" She was quiet so long he might have thought she'd fallen asleep. "Finally, not in body, but there are other kinds of hurt." "Yes," he said, "there are." She thought he might say more about Wyoming, about what had driven him to this remote corner of the world. But the silence stretched on, filled only with the sound of breathing and fire, until eventually she heard his breath deepen into sleep. Outside, the cold pressed against the windows like a living thing, seeking entry. But inside, warmed by fire and something else, something fragile and unnamed, two damaged souls found respite from their separate winters. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. His ribs would need tending. Decisions would have to be made about propriety and appearances. But tonight, with a fire holding back the dark and Wade sleeping just feet away, Miriam allowed herself to feel what she'd forbidden for so long. Not alone. Morning came pale and bitter cold. Miriam woke to find the fire nearly dead, her breath misting in the frigid air. She slipped from bed quietly, not wanting to wake Wade, and padded to the stove in stocking feet. As she coaxed the embers back to life, she heard him stir. "I should have kept the fire going," he said, voice rough with sleep and pain. "You needed rest more than we needed warmth," she added, kindling carefully. "How are your ribs?" "Better." He sat up slowly, testing the binding. "Well enough to head home." She turned to look at him properly. His color was still off, and she caught the way he held himself too carefully. "After breakfast, and I'm checking those ribs again first." He didn't argue, which told her more about his pain than any admission would have. While coffee brewed and cornmeal mush bubbled on the stove, she helped him remove his shirt for inspection. The bruising had darkened overnight, spreading like spilled ink across his skin. "2 more days," she said firmly. "You need 2 more days before you should ride." "I can't stay here 2 more days. People will talk." "Let them talk. I'm done caring what people say about me." He caught her wrist as she reached to adjust the binding. His hand was warm, calloused, gentle. "But I care what they say about you." The touch sent something electric through her, and she saw her own shock reflected in his amber eyes. He released her immediately, looking away. "Your reputation." "My reputation was ruined the day I stood up in that factory and told Mr. Hartwell exactly what I thought of his safety standards. Everything since has just been echo." She resumed checking his ribs, keeping her touch clinical. "Besides, no one comes out here. No one will know." It was the wrong thing to say. They both heard it, the implication that what happened here, isolated from the world, didn't count, that they were somehow outside the normal rules. She busied herself with breakfast, ladling mush into bowls, pouring coffee with unnecessary precision. They ate in silence, charged with awareness. Every movement felt magnified, the clink of spoon on tin, the brush of her skirt as she passed his chair, the way their eyes met and skittered away. By afternoon, a solution of sorts presented itself. The mare needed tending food, water, shelter from the continuing cold. Wade insisted on seeing to her despite his injury, and Miriam insisted on helping, working together in the small lean-to. They found their equilibrium again. "She's a good horse," Miriam said, stroking the mare's neck while Wade checked her hooves for ice. "Bought her off a Cherokee trader 5 years back. She's carried me through worse than this." "Where?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Through worse where?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Colorado first, after Wyoming, mining camps mostly, then Montana for a spell." He set down the mare's hoof carefully. "Kept moving until I got tired of running. Ended up here. And Wyoming before the running." His hands stilled on the curry brush. Outside, wind sighed through the pines. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was seeing something far away. "Had a claim there, good land near water. Built a cabin bigger than this. Thought I'd ranch cattle, maybe horses." He resumed brushing with mechanical strokes. The war had just ended. Everything seemed possible then. She waited, not pushing. She'd learned patience in the mill, where the wrong word at the wrong time could cost you a job or worse. There was a woman, Emma. The name came out cracked, rusty with disuse. Shopkeeper's daughter in town, hair like wheat in sunshine. We were going to marry come spring. Miriam's chest tightened, though she had no right to the feeling. "Railroad came through that winter, needed the water on my land. I said no." His voice hardened. "They didn't like hearing no. One night, riders came, burned the cabin, shot my stock. I was in town, getting—" He stopped, swallowed. "Getting a ring-sized." The brush stilled against the mare's flank. Miriam reached out, not touching, but near enough he'd know she was there. "Emma was at the cabin. She'd come to surprise me," her father said later, "to see the house where she'd live as a bride." Oh no." Miriam closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her. "They said it was outlaws, drifters, but I knew better. Railroad money ran that town, ran the law. Nothing I could prove." He set the brush aside with careful precision. "I left the next day, been moving ever since." "Wade, I'm so sorry." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "Why did you tell them no at the mill?" The change of subject threw her, but she recognized the deflection. He'd shown her his wound, now he needed to see hers. "There was a girl, Mary Sullivan, barely 15. Got her hand caught in a loom because the safety guard was broken. Mr. Hartwell had been told about it for weeks." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Mary lost 3 fingers. When she came back, he docked her pay for reduced productivity. Bastard. I organized the women. We demanded repairs, fair wages, decent hours." Hartwell laughed, said he could replace us all tomorrow with Irish girls fresh off the boat. Her voice grew hard. "So I told him what I thought, in front of his investors. Used words ladies aren't supposed to know." "Good for you. Was it they blacklisted me, every mill from Boston to Philadelphia, branded me a troublemaker, an agitator, unnatural woman who didn't know her place?" She met his eyes. "Mary Sullivan still lost her fingers. Girls are still working those dangerous looms. All I did was ruin my own life. You stood up and got knocked down, just like you." They looked at each other across the small space of the lean-to. Two people who'd learned the cost of saying no to powerful men. Wade reached out, slowly, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpected, that tears pricked her eyes. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" "Don't look at me like I'm not what I am. Like I'm some delicate thing instead of a too tall, too loud spinster who couldn't even keep a factory job. Is that what you see when you look in the mirror? It's what everyone sees. Not everyone. His thumb brushed her cheek, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I see a woman who stood up for a girl she barely knew, who took in a stranger with busted ribs, who makes the best cornbread I've ever eaten and isn't afraid of an axe. Wade. I see someone worth riding through a snowstorm to check on, worth splitting 5 cords of wood for. Worth. He stopped, dropping his hand. I should check the horse's water. But she caught his sleeve. Worth what? He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression. Decision made. Worth stopping running for. The words hung between them like suspended snow, crystalline and perfect and terrifying. Miriam felt her heart beating too fast, too hard. This was the moment where she should step back, make some excuse, rebuild the walls that kept her safe. Instead, she stepped closer. I'm scared, she admitted. Of me. Of hoping. Of wanting something I can't have. Of being wrong again about what's possible. He covered her hand with his. What if you're not wrong? She laughed, shaky and uncertain. I'm always wrong about these things. Ask anyone who knew me back east, Miriam Alcott, who never knew when to keep her mouth shut or her hopes modest. I like your mouth, he said quietly. And your hopes. Heat flooded her face. You barely know me. I know enough. His fingers interlaced with hers. I know you're brave and kind and stronger than you think. I know you make my ribs hurt less just by fussing over them. I know I've been looking forward to splitting your wood more than anything else in my week. That's just proximity, loneliness, the cold making us both foolish. Maybe. He squeezed her hand gently. Or maybe 2 people who've been running finally found a reason to stop. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that this rough-handed, quiet man saw something in her worth staying for. But history had taught her hard lessons about wanting things beyond her reach. Your ribs need rest, she said finally, retreat disguised as care. Come inside before you freeze. He let her go, understanding her need for distance. But as they walked back to the cabin, he said quietly, I meant it, Miriam, every word. She pretended not to hear, but her hand still tingled where he'd held it, and her heart hadn't resumed its normal rhythm. Inside, she busied herself with unnecessary tasks, arranging already tidy shelves, sweeping an already clean floor. Anything to avoid looking at him and seeing that steady, amber gaze that seemed to see right through her defenses. That night, as they ate a simple supper of beans and biscuits, the awareness between them was different. Not the sharp tension of the morning, but something warmer, deeper. When their hands brushed passing the salt, neither pulled away immediately. When she caught him watching her, he didn't look away. Play something, she said impulsively, remembering the harmonica she'd seen in his coat pocket days ago. You don't want to hear that. I do. He pulled out the small instrument, worn smooth with handling. Been a while. But when he played, the notes were clear and true, a melody she didn't recognize, something slow and wistful that made her think of empty spaces and starlit nights. She stopped pretending to mend and just listened, watching the way his eyes closed, the way the music seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. When he finished, the silence felt holy. That was beautiful, she whispered. Emma loved when I played. Said it was the only time I wasn't trying to be tough. He tucked the harmonica away. Haven't played for anyone since. The gift of that admission, of being the first person in years to hear his music, made her chest ache. She rose, moving to sit beside him on the floor near the fire. Not touching, but close enough to feel his warmth. Thank you, she said simply. They sat watching the flames, shoulders almost touching, as night pressed against the windows. Tomorrow he would leave, go back to his solitary shack. They would return to their careful dance of meals and wood splitting, pretending this hadn't happened. But tonight, in the circle of firelight with his music still echoing in the air, Miriam let herself imagine what it would be like to stop running, to be worth staying for. The February moon hung fat and silver over Black Hollow, turning the snow-covered clearing into something from a fairy tale. Miriam stood on the porch, shawl wrapped tight, watching her breath cloud in the frigid air. It had been 2 weeks since Wade's injury, since those strange, intimate days when the walls between them had grown thin as paper. They'd returned to their routine. He came to split wood. She fed him. They talked of safe things like weather and horses. But something had fundamentally shifted. She caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Their fingers lingered when passing dishes. The very air between them seemed charged with possibility. Tonight was different. He'd stayed later than usual, helping her repair a loose board in the floor. Now he stood beside her on the porch, both of them reluctant to end the evening. "Full moon," she said unnecessarily. "Makes the snow look like diamonds." He shifted slightly closer. "Emma used to say—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "You can talk about her," Miriam said quietly. "She was important to you. That doesn't change just because—" "Because what?" "Because you're here with me now. Because something is happening between us. Because I think about you at night when the cabin is dark and cold. Because time has passed," she finished lamely. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "She would have liked you, Emma. She had strong opinions too. Told her father he was cheating farmers on grain prices, right in front of customers." "Sounds like she had courage." "She did, but it was different. She was—" He searched for words. "She was summer sunshine, easy to love. You're—" Miriam tensed, waiting for the comparison that would find her lacking. "You're like this." He gestured at the winter landscape. "Beautiful in a way that makes a man work to see it. Worth the effort." Her breath caught. "Wade." I know we're both carrying too much past to make promises. But I need you to know these weeks. Being here, it's the first time since Wyoming that I've wanted to stay put." She turned to face him fully. In the moonlight, his eyes were almost gold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying my shack is cold and empty, and I spend too much time thinking about you. I'm saying I've started looking forward to morning because it means I might see you." He touched her face, fingertips barely grazing her cheek. "I'm saying I'm tired of running, Miriam." "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I'm nearly 30. I've never—" "There was a boy. Once, before the mill. But he wanted someone softer, smaller, someone who knew her place. I don't want you softer or smaller. I want you exactly as you are." The words broke something in her. She'd spent so many years trying to fit into spaces too small for her spirit, bending and contorting until she'd almost forgotten her true shape. And here was this man, this careful, wounded soul, telling her she was enough as she was. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared together is better than being brave alone." She leaned into his touch, allowing herself this moment of weakness, or was it strength? "The town already talks about us, Mrs. Henley made sure I knew that when I went for supplies last week. The strange woman and the hermit, she called us." "Let them talk. They've been calling me worse than hermit for years. What if they're right? What if we're both too damaged for this?" He was quiet, considering. Then, "You know what I think everybody's damaged. Some folks just hide it better. Question is whether you find someone whose damage fits with yours." Despite everything, she laughed. "That's either the least romantic or most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm out of practice with pretty words. I don't need pretty words." "What do you need?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. What did she need? Safety? Certainly peace, but standing here in the moonlight with Wade's hand warm against her cheek, she realized those weren't the only things anymore. "Time," she said finally. "I need time to trust this, to trust you, to trust myself." "I've got nothing but time." "And I need—" She took a breath, I need to know this isn't just convenience, that you're not here because I'm the only woman for miles who'll talk to you." His hand dropped, and for a moment she thought she'd offended him. Then he laughed, short and rueful. "Miriam, I could ride to town any night. Plenty of women at the saloon who'd talk to me for the price of a drink. Mrs. Carlson has been trying to introduce me to her niece for 3 years. Then why? Because none of them ever made me want to play my harmonica again. None of them made me think about fixing up my shack, making it somewhere worth living instead of just existing." He met her eyes. "None of them made me want to stop running." The raw honesty in his voice undid her. She reached out, catching his hand before he could step back. His fingers were cold, calloused, perfect. "Play for me again." He blinked at the sudden shift. Now. He pulled out the harmonica, and in the crystal night air, began to play. This melody was different, not sad, but thoughtful, like a question being asked. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, feeling it in her chest like a second heartbeat. When he finished, she opened her eyes to find him watching her with an expression so tender it made her throat tight. "That's new," she said. "Made it up, just now." He tucked the harmonica away. "Music's easier than words sometimes." What was it asking the melody? "Same thing I am, I suppose. Whether you might let me court you proper, slow and careful, like you need." Court, such an old-fashioned word, but it fit. Not the desperate passion of youth or the calculated negotiations she'd seen at the mill, where marriages were made for survival. Something else deliberate, patient, honest. "I don't know how to be courted," she admitted. "I don't know how to be feminine, delicate, whatever it is women are supposed to be. Good thing I'm not looking for what women are supposed to be." He squeezed her hand. "I'm looking for you. I might disappoint you." "You might. I might disappoint you too. That's the risk of it." She thought about risk, about the safe, small life she'd built here in her cabin. It would be so easy to stay in that life, to keep Wade at arm's length where he couldn't hurt her, but easy had never been her way. Had it, she'd stood up in that factory knowing the cost. She'd traveled alone across the country to this remote place. She'd survived. Maybe it was time to do more than survive. "All right," she said quietly. "All right. You can court me, proper and slow." She managed a smile. "Though I'm not sure what proper even looks like out here." "I'll figure it out." He lifted her hand to his lips, the gesture unexpectedly formal. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to try." As he prepared to leave, saddling his patient mare, Miriam felt something shift inside her chest. Not the wild flutter of infatuation or the desperate need she'd seen destroy women at the mill. Something steadier, a warmth like banked coals that might, with careful tending, grow into lasting fire. "Wade," she called as he mounted. He turned in the saddle. "I'm glad you're tired of running." His smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardship. "So am I." She watched him ride away through the moonlit trees, his figure dark against the silver snow, when she could no longer hear the mare's hoofbeats. She went inside and added wood to the stove. The cabin felt different, not empty, but waiting, full of potential. At the table, she opened her mother's Bible to press the small sprig of pine Wade had absently handed her while fixing the floor. As she smoothed the pages, her eye caught a verse her mother had underlined years ago: "Two are better than one, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow." Miriam had fallen so many times from grace, from respectability, from the narrow path prescribed for women like her. But maybe Wade was right. Maybe the point wasn't to never fall. Maybe it was to find someone who understood falling, who'd help you stand again without judgment. Outside, clouds began to gather, promising more snow by morning. But inside, warmed by fire and something more, Miriam Alcott allowed herself to hope that spring might come after all. That night, She dreamed not of factories or fire, but of music, a harmonica playing somewhere in the distance, growing closer with each note, like someone finding their way home. The whispers started small, like snow beginning to fall, barely noticeable at first, then impossible to ignore. Miriam became aware of them during her weekly trip to Carlson's store, when conversations stopped mid-sentence as she entered. Women who'd nodded politely before now turned away, busying themselves with examining goods they had no intention of buying. The usual supplies. Miss Alcott. "Mr. Carlson asked, his manner still professional, but somehow cooler. "Yes, please." She kept her voice steady, though she felt the weight of eyes on her back. Mrs. Carlson, who'd sent the blue scarf, was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a younger woman Miriam didn't recognize worked behind the counter, sorting mail with unnecessary focus. As Mr. Carlson measured out flour, Mrs. Henley swept in, the boarding house proprietress's presence filling the store like a harsh wind. Her gaze found Miriam immediately, lips pursing with disapproval. "Miss Alcott," she said, the greeting sharp as winter ice. "Still living alone in that cabin, I hear—" "Yes, ma'am. Though perhaps not always alone." The question dripped with insinuation. "Mr. Callahan's horse has been seen on that trail quite regular." Miriam straightened her spine, a familiar gesture from her mill days. "Mr. Callahan splits wood for me, as he does for several households." "Does he now? And does he stay for supper at all those households? Does he linger past dark at all of them?" Heat crept up Miriam's neck, but she kept her voice level. "I wouldn't know about his other arrangements." "Mrs." Henley stepped closer, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "You should be more careful. Miss Alcott, a woman in your position, no family, no connections, already marked as peculiar, you can't afford scandal." "I've done nothing scandalous." "Haven't you?" The older woman's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "A single woman, entertaining a single man, unchaperoned. At all hours, what would you call it?" "I'd call it paying for honest work with a hot meal," Miriam replied, though her hands trembled as she accepted her wrapped purchases from Mr. Carlson. "Others might call it something else entirely." Mrs. Henley adjusted her gloves with precise movements. "I only speak out of Christian concern. Of course, a woman like you, well, you should guard what little reputation remains to you." The words followed Miriam out of the store, echoing in her mind during the long walk back to the cabin. A woman like you. She'd heard variations of it all her life, too tall, too strong, too outspoken, too much. Now she could add too scandalous to the list. Wade arrived that afternoon to finish the last of the winter wood. She watched him from the window, noting the efficient grace of his movements, the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. When he knocked, she almost didn't answer. "Mrs." Henley's words like thorns in her thoughts. Miriam, concern colored his voice through the door. "You all right?" She opened it, forcing a smile. "Fine, just wool gathering." His eyes narrowed slightly. He'd learned to read her moods these past weeks. But he didn't push, just accepted the coffee she offered and went to work. When evening came and she invited him to stay for supper, as always, she saw him hesitate. "Maybe I shouldn't," he said quietly. "Not tonight." "Oh." The rejection stung more than it should have. "Of course. If you have somewhere else to be." "That's not it." He set down his axe, turning to face her fully. "I was in town this morning. Heard some talk." Her stomach dropped. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that means I should be more careful about your reputation. Maybe I should take my meals and go, not linger." "Since when do you care what the town says?" "Since it started affecting you." His jaw tightened. "That Henley woman's got a vicious tongue. I won't be the reason she uses it against you." Miriam felt something hot and fierce rise in her chest, the same feeling that had driven her to stand up in that factory. So that's it. We let her win. Let their small minds dictate how we live. It's not about winning. Isn't it? She stepped onto the porch, cold air sharp against her heated cheeks. I've been letting people like Mrs. Henley push me around my whole life, telling me I'm too much of this, not enough of that. I came here to escape that. And I won't be the reason you have to escape again. You're not. She stopped, frustration making her voice thick. Wade, you're the first good thing that's happened to me in years. Am I supposed to give that up because some bitter old woman has nothing better to do than gossip? He moved closer, his expression softening. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of making myself smaller to fit other people's comfort. She met his eyes. I'm saying stay for supper, please. He studied her face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, but we do this right. I'll speak to Reverend Morrison tomorrow. Make my intentions clear. Court you proper, like I promised. The Reverend Wade, we're not... Not yet, he agreed. But I want folks to know I'm serious, that this isn't what they're making it out to be. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had wanted to defend her honor rather than question it? They ate in companionable silence, the specter of town gossip gradually fading in the warmth of the cabin. After supper, Wade helped her clear the dishes, their movements synchronized from weeks of practice. I should tell you, he said as he dried a plate. It might get worse before it gets better. Small towns don't forgive easy, especially women who don't follow the rules. I know. She'd seen it at the mill, how quickly admiration could turn to acid, how women were the first to tear down one of their own who stepped out of line. Are you sure you want to be associated with the town pariah? He set down the plate, turning her to face him with gentle hands on her shoulders. Miriam, I've been the town hermit for 7 years. You think I care what they call me now? It's different for men. Is it? They whisper about me too. Say I'm touched in the head from the war. Say I'm drinking myself to death in that shack. Say I killed a man in Wyoming and that's why I ran. His thumbs rubbed small circles on her shoulders. Difference is, I stopped caring what they say. Maybe it's time you did too. Easy for you to say. You don't need their approval to survive. A woman alone. You're not alone anymore. The words were quiet but firm. Not if you don't want to be. The simplicity of the statement undid her. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through worn flannel. His arms came around her, careful but sure. This is improper, she murmured into his shirt. Probably. So Mrs. Henley would have apoplexy if she saw. Good thing she's not here then. She laughed despite everything, the sound muffled against him. When she pulled back, his eyes were warm with something that made her breath catch. I should go, he said, though he made no move to release her. Before we give them real reason to talk. Yes, she agreed, though every part of her wanted him to stay. At the door, he paused. Miriam, that day at the mill, when you stood up, you did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you different. After he left, she sat by the fire thinking about courage, how it came in different forms. The courage to speak up, yes, but also the courage to trust, the courage to hope, the courage to let someone pass the walls years of hurt had built. Outside, wind rattled the windows, bringing the promise of more snow. But inside, wrapped in the warmth, Wade had left behind his presence lingering in the cabin like a blessing. Miriam made a decision. Let them talk. Let Mrs. Henley clutch her pearls and whisper behind gloved hands. Let the whole town think what they would. She'd survived worse than gossip. And if Wade was willing to weather the storm with her, maybe that was worth more than all the reputation in the world. She pulled out paper and pen, writing by lamplight. Mrs. Carlson, thank you for the beautiful scarf. It has brought me warmth in more ways than one. I hope we might take tea together soon. If you're willing, I find I'm in need of a friend. Yours, Miriam Alcott. It was a risk, Mrs. Carlson might reject the overture, might side with the gossips, but Wade was right. She'd stopped taking risks, stopped reaching out, stopped believing people might surprise her with kindness. Time to be brave again. As she sealed the letter, she thought of Wade riding home through the darkness, thought of him facing down the Reverend tomorrow, declaring his intentions to court the town's most difficult woman. The image made her smile despite everything. Perhaps being difficult wasn't the curse she'd always believed. Perhaps, with the right person, it could be a gift, someone who wouldn't let life crush the spirit out of her, someone who'd stand up to the Mrs. Henleys of the world, someone who thought she was worth the trouble. The storm arrived without warning, turning afternoon to twilight in minutes. Miriam had been mending a tear in her winter cloak when the first winds hit, rattling the cabin with unusual force. Within an hour, snow fell so thick she couldn't see the wood pile from the window. She built up the fire and settled in to wait it out. But as darkness fell, the storm only intensified. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow through every tiny gap in the walls. She stuffed rags under the door, added more wood to the stove, but the cold crept in regardless. By midnight, she was genuinely worried. This wasn't like the earlier winter storms. This had the feeling of something meaner, more dangerous. The cabin groaned under the wind's assault, and she could hear tree branches cracking in the forest. A sudden pounding at the door made her jump. For a moment, she thought it was just the storm, but then it came again, deliberate, urgent. Miriam, open up. Wade. She fumbled with the latch, and he practically fell inside, bringing a whirlwind of snow with him. His coat was white with ice, his face raw from the wind. What are you doing here? She pushed the door closed against the gale, having to throw her whole weight against it. Came to check this storm's bad, worse than anything we've had. He was already moving, checking the windows, testing the walls. Tree came down across the main trail. Nearly didn't make it through. You rode here in this? Could not come. He turned to face her, and she saw real concern in his eyes. These old cabins, in winds like this. As if to punctuate his words, something crashed outside, a tree falling. From the sound of it, the whole cabin shuddered. We need more weight against the walls, he said, immediately practical. Help me move the furniture. They worked together, pushing the heavy dresser against the north wall where the wind hit hardest, wedging the table against the door. As they worked, the storm seemed to grow even fiercer, the wind screaming through the trees with a sound like the end of the world. This is my fault, she said as they paused to catch their breath. If I'd stayed in town, taken a room at the boarding house. Stop. He caught her shoulders. This isn't about fault, it's about weather. But you wouldn't be trapped here if not for me. Your reputation. To hell with my reputation. The vehemence in his voice startled her. You think I care what they say when you could be? He stopped, jaw working. I couldn't sit in my shack wondering if you were safe. Another crash outside. Closer this time. The cabin's walls creaked ominously. The lean-to, Miriam gasped. Your horse! I put her in the trees, sheltered as I could make it. She's weathered worse. But his expression was grim. They both knew animals didn't always survive storms like this. The temperature continued to drop. Despite the fire roaring in the stove, ice began forming on the inside of the windows. Miriam pulled on every layer she owned, but still shivered. Come here, Wade said quietly. She hesitated. Wade. I know, but freezing to death won't save your reputation either. He opened his arms. Just warmth. Miriam, that's all. She went to him, letting him wrap his coat around both of them as they stood before the stove. His body heat was like a furnace after the creeping cold, and she couldn't suppress a shiver of relief. Better. Yes, she whispered into his shirt. They stood like that as the storm raged, not speaking, just sharing warmth and the comfort of another human presence against the wildness outside. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and sure, could feel the rise and fall of his breathing. "I was married before," she said suddenly, the words surprising her. She'd never told anyone in Black Hollow, had tried to bury that part of her past along with her maiden name. His arms tightened slightly. "Were you—" "For 6 months, when I was 19. The memories came reluctantly, dragged out by the darkness and strange intimacy of the storm. Henry Alcott, he worked at the mill, seemed kind enough. My parents were dead. I had no prospects. It seemed like the smart choice." Wade said nothing, just held her, letting her speak at her own pace. He wasn't cruel, exactly, just disappointed. I wasn't the wife he'd imagined. Too tall, too strong, too many opinions. He wanted someone delicate who'd need protecting. Instead, he got me. "What happened?" "Consumption took him that first winter. I nursed him best I could, but—" She shrugged against him. "I kept his name. Widow sounded better than spinster when I went looking for work. Told myself I was honoring his memory, but really I think I was hiding." "We all hide from something." "What are you hiding from?" She pulled back enough to see his face. "Besides Wyoming." His expression went distant, eyes reflecting the firelight. "The war, mostly. Things I did, things I saw. I was barely 18 when I enlisted. Thought it would be an adventure. Came back 4 years later feeling like an old man." "Which side?" "Union, Indiana Regiment. Though by the end, didn't much matter which side you started on. We were all just trying to survive." He touched her face gently. "That's why Wyoming felt like such a gift. Clean start. Emma, the land. Thought I could build something good enough to balance out the bad. Maybe you still can." "Maybe." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Question is whether you want to build it with me." Before she could answer, an enormous crack split the air. The whole cabin lurched, and for a terrifying moment, she thought the roof would come down. Wade pulled her tight against him, shielding her with his body as debris rattled above them. "Tree hit the corner," he said when the shaking stopped. "We need to check the damage." But when he tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. Snow had drifted too high, or worse. The fallen tree had blocked it. They were well and truly trapped until the storm passed. "The window," she suggested. He checked, but snow had piled past the sills. Even if they could get out, there was nowhere to go in the storm. "Nothing to do but wait," he said, trying to sound calm. They pulled the mattress close to the stove, piling on every blanket and quilt in the cabin. As the wind shrieked and the cabin groaned, they huddled together for warmth, propriety forgotten in the face of survival. "I'm scared," Miriam admitted in the darkness. "Me too." "What if—" "Shh," he pulled her closer. "We're going to be fine. This cabin stood for 20 years. It'll stand one more night." "How can you be sure?" "Because I need it to. Because I'm not losing someone else to random cruelty." His voice was fierce. "Because I just found you, and I'll be damned if I let a storm take that away." The raw honesty in his words made her throat tight. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and snow that clung to him. "Will you stay?" She whispered the words so quietly she wasn't sure he'd hear over the storm. "For my first night." She felt him go very still. They both understood what she was asking, not for anything improper, but for the promise of presence, of not facing the darkness alone. It was perhaps the most intimate request she'd ever made. "Yes," he said simply, "for this night and any other you need. No grand declarations, no passionate promises, just that quiet certainty that meant more than any flowery words could have." Wade Callahan was a man who meant what he said, who understood that sometimes the greatest intimacy was simply staying. They talked through the night as the storm raged, quiet conversations about everything and nothing. He told her about Indiana summers, swimming in creek water warm as bath water. She told him about the first time she'd stood up to a foreman, voice shaking but spine straight. They shared memories like gifts, building a bridge between their separate pasts. When dawn finally came, pale and exhausted, the storm had blown itself out. They emerged to find a world transformed, trees down everywhere. Snow drifted to the cabin's eaves, the landscape rearranged by wind and violence. The lean-to had partially collapsed, but miraculously, Wade's mare had survived. Though clearly shaken, it took them most of the day to dig out, to clear a path to the woodpile, to assess the damage. The cabin had held, though it would need repairs come spring. As Wade prepared to leave, he'd need to check his own place. See what damage the storm had done. Miriam caught his hand. "Thank you for coming, for staying." He lifted her hand to his lips, the gesture becoming familiar between them. Always. After he'd gone, Miriam stood in her doorway looking at the storm-altered landscape. Everything looked different in the aftermath, trees gone that had seemed permanent. New vistas opened where walls of pine had stood. Change could come sudden as a storm, violent and terrifying. But sometimes, she thought, remembering the solid warmth of Wade's arms through the terrible night, change brought unexpected gifts. Sometimes it cleared away the deadwood to make room for something new to grow, something worth staying for. The morning after the storm dawned clear and impossibly bright, sunlight glaring off the transformed landscape. Miriam stood at her table, kneading dough for the day's bread, when she heard the familiar sound of Wade's mare picking through the snow. He appeared in the doorway with an armload of lumber, sawdust in his hair. "Thought I'd get started on those repairs. That corner won't last another storm without work." "You don't have to." "I know." He set the wood down, brushing off his hands. "My place weathered it fine. Nothing there that needs immediate tending." They worked through the morning in comfortable partnership. She handed him nails while he hammered, held boards steady while he sawed, when the sun climbed high enough to warm the air. She brought him water and noticed a fresh cut on his hand. "Let me see that." "It's nothing. Wade Callahan, we've had this discussion." But her scolding was gentle, tinged with fondness. He surrendered his hand for inspection. As she cleaned the cut, he said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you asked, during the storm." Her hand stilled. "Oh." "About staying." He met her eyes. "I want you to know that meant something, you trusting me that way." Heat rose in her cheeks. "I was frightened. The storm." "Not just the storm." His voice was certain. "You were trusting me with more than that." She couldn't deny it. That whispered request had come from somewhere deeper than fear of wind and weather. It had been about choosing not to be alone, about letting someone pass the last of her defenses. "Yes," she admitted, "I was. I've been thinking about the future too," he continued, turning his hand to interlace their fingers. "Spring's coming. I could build onto my place, make it proper, or I could build a second room here, separate entrance, all proper-like. Give you help with the heavy work, someone close if another storm hits." He paused. "If you'd want that." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Wade, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm tired of riding 3 miles through snow to see you. Tired of leaving when what I want is to stay." He squeezed her hand. "I'm saying maybe it's time we stopped pretending this is just about wood splitting and hot meals." "The town. We'll talk either way. Reverend Morrison knows my intentions. I've been clear about courting you proper." His jaw set with determination. "Question is what you want, not what they think." Miriam looked at their joined hands, his so much larger but careful with hers, marked by the same kind of work that had marked her own. She thought of the night just past, how right it had felt to weather the storm together, to wake knowing he was there. "I could help with your cabin too," she said slowly. "Cooking, mending. We could share the work, share the—" She searched for words. "Share the living of it." "Is that a yes?" To which question the building or the courting or the staying. "All of it, any of it, whatever you're ready for." She took a breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of a cliff. One step and everything would change. No more hiding. No more pretending she was meant for solitude. It terrified her. It thrilled her. "Build the room," she said. "Court me while you build it. Let's see what we're making here, day by day." His smile was like sunrise after the storm, slow, warm, transformative. "You won't regret this." "I might," she said honestly, "but I think I'd regret not trying more." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her palm where the mill scars made white lines. "We'll go slow, careful, do this right. I don't need perfect, Wade. I just need real. Real I can do." They returned to the repairs, but everything felt different now, charged with possibility and promise. When their hands brushed passing tools, neither pulled away. When she brought him lunch, he tugged her down to sit beside him on the porch steps, their shoulders touching as they ate. "I should warn you," she said, watching shadows move across the snow. "I'm not an easy woman to live near. I sing badly when I cook. I have opinions about everything. I can't embroider worth a damn, and I've been known to argue with newspapers." "I snore," he offered in return. "I forget to eat when I'm working. I've read the same 3 books so many times I quote them without thinking. And I've been alone so long I sometimes forget how to be with people." "We're a pair, aren't we? Maybe that's why it works." He bumped her shoulder gently. "Two difficult people who understand difficult." That afternoon, as he sketched out plans for the addition in the dirt, she found herself imagining it a future where loneliness was choice rather than circumstance, where the cabin held laughter alongside silence, where someone cared if she made it through the storm. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, noticing her distant expression. "That I came here to hide," she admitted. "But maybe what I was really doing was waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone who'd see me as worth the trouble." She met his eyes. "For you." He set aside the stick he'd been drawing with and cupped her face in his hands. "Miriam, you're not trouble. You're treasure. Just took someone with eyes to see it." "Pretty words, Mr. Callahan. Thought you were out of practice. You inspire me to improve." She laughed, the sound bright in the clear air. "Careful, or I'll expect poetry next." "Don't push your luck." But that evening, as they stood on the porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, he did pull out his harmonica. The melody he played was new, hopeful, with none of the melancholy that usually colored his music. "What's that one called?" she asked when he finished. He considered. "Haven't named it yet. What would you call it?" She thought about the day the plans sketched in dirt, the promises made with careful words, the feeling of standing at the beginning of something neither of them quite dared name yet. "Staying," she said finally. "I'd call it Staying." "Good name." He tucked the harmonica away and took her hand. "Dance with me." "There's no music." "Sure there is." He drew her into his arms, moving slowly, though only they could hear the rhythm. "Listen." And she did hear it in the whisper of wind through pines, in the distant call of an owl, in the beating of 2 hearts learning to keep time together. They swayed on the porch of the cabin that would soon grow to hold them both, under stars that had watched 1,000 other lovers learn this same ancient dance. "I should go," he said eventually, though he made no move to release her. "I know." "Tomorrow I'll bring more lumber. Start proper on the addition. I'll make oatmeal cookies, the ones with molasses you pretend not to love." "I don't pretend anything." But he was smiling. "Not anymore." After he left, Miriam stood in her cabin, their cabin, soon, and felt the shape of her life changing around her. The walls that had felt like shelter and prison both would soon expand, making room for a future she'd never dared imagine. On the table, Wade had left something, a small piece of wood, carefully carved. She picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth surface. It was a bird, wings spread in flight, but with roots extending from its feet, grounding it even as it soared. She understood the message. They were both creatures of flight, marked by their escapes, But maybe, just maybe, they'd found a place to grow roots together, a place to build something worth staying for. Outside, snow began to fall again. Gentle this time. Spring would come soon, bringing change and growth and the unknown, but tonight, in her cabin warm with promise. Miriam Alcott allowed herself to hope that the best storms were behind her, that what lay ahead was worth whatever weather might come. The addition to the cabin was nearly complete, spring sunshine warming the fresh-cut boards. When everything shifted in a single moment, Miriam had been hanging laundry on the line, humming tunelessly as she worked, while Wade fitted the last of the window frames. It was such an ordinary afternoon, birds calling, breeze stirring the new leaves, the comfortable sound of his hammer keeping rhythm. "Storm coming," he said, glancing at clouds building over the mountains. "Should finish this before it hits." She looked up, shading her eyes. The clouds were dark but distant, and the air still felt warm. "We have time." Maybe. But he worked faster, wanting to protect the new construction from weather. They'd fallen into such easy partnership over the weeks of building. She'd learned to anticipate which tool he'd need next. He'd learned exactly how she liked her coffee. The town still whispered, but their days had taken on a rhythm that felt like belonging. As she pinned the last shirt to the line, Wade stepped back to examine his work. The addition stood solid and true, one room with its own entrance as promised, but connected to the main cabin by a covered walkway. Proper enough to satisfy propriety, close enough to share daily life. "It's perfect," she said, coming to stand beside him. "Almost." He pulled something from his pocket, a small brass key. "Needs this." She took it wonderingly. Her own key, to her own door. Such a simple thing, but her throat tightened with emotion. At the boarding houses, the mills, even in her marriage, she'd never had a space that was truly hers. "Wade, He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her words fade. He looked nervous. She realized with surprise, Wade Callahan, who faced down storms and gossip with equal calm, was nervous. Miriam. He took her hands, the key warm between their palms. "I've been trying to find the right words for this. Been practicing speeches in my head like some green boy." "Wade, what?" "Let me say this, please." He took a breath. "I came here to hide. Spent 7 years barely living, just existing day to day. Then you arrived with your stubborn courage and your terrible singing and your way of seeing straight through to the truth of things." "Despite everything," she laughed softly. "Terrible singing." "Awful. Worst I've ever heard." His thumb stroked over her knuckles. "I want to hear it every morning for the rest of my life." Her heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. "Wade." "I know," he said slow. "I know we're both carrying scars that won't ever fully heal. But Miriam, I don't want to court you anymore." He met her eyes, amber depths full of certainty. "I want to marry you. Want to build a life with you that's about more than surviving. Want to wake up every day knowing you're there, knowing we chose each other despite everything." The key pressed between their palms like a promise. She thought of all the reasons to say no, the gossip, the fear, the weight of past failures. Then she thought of these past months, how the loneliness that had seemed permanent had eased into something else, how his presence had transformed her exile into a homecoming. "I don't know how to be a wife," she said quietly. "I failed at it before." "I don't want you to be a wife. I want you to be my wife. There's a difference." He released one of her hands to touch her face. "I want the woman who stands up to injustice and splits her own wood and makes the best cornbread in the territory. I want you, Miriam, not some idea of what you should be." "I can't give you children." The words came hard, but they needed saying. "The doctor said, after Henry died, the illness damaged things. I can't—" "I know." His voice was gentle. "You told me, that night you were patching up my ribs, when the whiskey made us both too honest." She had forgotten, or thought he had. And you still... Emma wanted 6 children, a big house, the kind of life you see in magazine pictures. He drew her closer. I wanted those things too, then, but that was a different man, wanting a different life. What I want now is simpler. Just you, just this, just the chance to choose happiness instead of hiding. The clouds were moving faster now, wind picking up. The storm would be on them soon. But Miriam felt suspended in this moment, balanced between past and future like a hawk on an updraft. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." She laughed, sudden and bright. "Yes to your snoring and your old books. Yes to building something new from all our broken pieces." He kissed her then, their first real kiss, under the darkening sky with the smell of rain coming. It was careful and tender and full of promise. The kiss of 2 people who'd learned that love could be gentle, that passion could build slow like good wood fire. When they broke apart, the first drops were falling. "We should get inside," she said, though she didn't move from his arms. In a moment, he rested his forehead against hers. "Want to remember this. The day Miriam Alcott made me the happiest hermit in the territory." "Former hermit," she corrected. "Hard to be a hermit with a wife. Best reason I can think of to give it up." They barely made it inside before the skies opened. Rain pounded on the roof as they stood in the doorway between old cabin and new addition, watching water pour off the eaves. The laundry she'd hung was soaked through, but she couldn't bring herself to care. "When?" she asked. "When should we marry?" "Tomorrow. Next week, whenever you're ready." He pulled her back against his chest, arms wrapping around her. "Though we might want to warn Reverend Morrison first. Man's old, might need time to prepare for the shock." "The whole town will be shocked." "Let them be. Maybe it'll give them something new to talk about besides our improper suppers." She turned in his arms to face him. "Are you sure your reputation?" "Will improve considerably when I'm married to the bravest woman in Black Hollow." He kissed her forehead. "Besides, my reputation was destroying my liver. All those nights they thought I was drinking myself to death. I was actually reading the same 3 books and playing sad songs on my harmonica." "What books?" "Moby Dick, The Last of the Mohicans, and a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets that belonged to my mother. Poetry Wade Callahan reads poetry. Only when I'm certain no one will find out." He grinned. "Now you know my darkest secret. I'll take it to my grave." She pulled his head down for another kiss, marveling at how natural it felt. "Though I might demand private readings as a wedding gift." "Demanding already, I see how this marriage will go." "Too late to back out now. You've given me a key." The rain continued through evening, turning the world soft and green outside their windows. They cooked supper together in the main cabin, shoulders bumping as they worked. Everything felt the same, yet utterly changed, charged with the electricity of decisions made, futures chosen. As they ate, Wade said, "I'll move my things after we're married. Make the addition mine until then. Keep things proper." "Proper," she repeated, smiling. "Yes, because everything about us has been so proper until now. We've done our best. Can't help it if the town has overactive imaginations." "Speaking of the town," she sobered slightly. "Should we tell people, make an announcement?" "I'll tell Reverend Morrison tomorrow. Arrange things. You might want to tell Mrs. Carlson. She'll be pleased. Woman's been trying to matchmake me for years. She sent another letter with her last order. Invited me for tea Tuesday next." "You should go. Might be good to have a friend when the gossip starts flying." Miriam nodded, though the thought of facing the town's reaction made her stomach tight. Then Wade reached across the table to take her hand, and the knot eased. She wasn't facing it alone. Not anymore. Later, as the rain gentled to a patter, they stood on the porch watching mist rise from the warming earth. Wade played his harmonica, the hopeful melody he'd named Staying, while she leaned against the railing, content to listen. "I love you," she said when the last note faded. The words came easy as breathing, surprising her with their simplicity. I should have said it before. When you asked, but I love you. Wade Callahan. He set the harmonica aside and drew her close. And I love you. Miriam Alcott. Have for longer than I had any right to. How long? Since the day you tried to split your own wood and nearly took your foot off, stood there cursing like a sailor, mad as a wet cat, most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. That was months ago. I'm a patient man. He kissed her temple. Had to be, waiting for you to see past that hermit reputation to find someone worth keeping. I saw, she protested. I just needed time to believe it. And now I believe. She turned in his arms, looking up at his beloved face. I believe in us, in this life we're building, in choosing hope over fear. That's all I need to hear. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean. Tomorrow would bring challenges telling the town, facing judgment, planning a wedding that would set tongues wagging for months. But tonight, standing with Wade on the porch of their soon-to-be shared home, Miriam felt only peace. She'd come to Black Hollow looking for a place to hide. Instead, she'd found a place to grow, a place to love and be loved, a place where her strength was asset rather than liability, where her voice was welcomed rather than silenced, a place to stay. A week had passed since Wade's proposal, a week of quiet preparations and quieter joy. The news had spread through Black Hollow like wildfire, just as they'd expected. But this morning brought an unexpected visitor, Mrs. Henley herself, standing at Miriam's door with her mouth pursed like she'd bitten into spoiled fruit. Miss Alcott, she said, though Miriam had been Mrs. Alcott for over a decade. I've come on behalf of the Women's Moral Society. How kind. Miriam didn't invite her in. What can I do for you? We feel it's our Christian duty to warn you against this. Hasty decision, Mr. Callahan is not suitable. Suitable for what? Miriam kept her voice pleasant, though steel ran beneath it. For a respectable woman, his reputation, his hermit ways, the rumors about Wyoming. Are you referring to the man who spent all winter ensuring I had firewood, who risked his life in a blizzard to check on my safety, who's shown more kindness and decency than half the gossips in this town? Miriam stepped onto the porch, no longer willing to hide behind her door. That Mr. Callahan. Mrs. Henley's face reddened. You're making a spectacle of yourself. Again, just like at that factory. Oh yes, we know all about that. A troublemaker then. A scandal now. You're right. Miriam smiled, surprising the older woman. I am a troublemaker. I make trouble for people who think their narrow minds should dictate how others live. I make trouble for those who mistake cruelty for righteousness. How dare you? I dare because I've learned something. Miriam stood tall, shoulders back. I've spent too many years making myself smaller to fit other people's comfort. No more. Wade appeared around the corner of the cabin, drawn by voices. He took in the scene, Mrs. Henley's outrage, Miriam's defiance, and quietly moved to stand beside his fiancée. Mrs. Henley, he said, touching his hat brim. Fine morning for visiting. The older woman's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Mr. Callahan, I was just warning Miriam about my unsuitable nature. His voice was mild, but his eyes were hard. Appreciate the concern, but she's already well aware of my flaws. Loves me anyway. Miracle, really. This is highly improper. What's improper? Miriam said. Is thinking you have the right to judge our choices. Wade and I will marry tomorrow, with Reverend Morrison's blessing. You're welcome to attend, though somehow I doubt you will. Mrs. Henley drew herself up. The entire Moral Society will be praying for your souls. How kind, Wade said. We'll be sure to pray for yours as well, especially the parts about casting stones and loving thy neighbor. the woman left in a huff of wounded dignity. As her buggy disappeared down the trail, Miriam found herself laughing not bitter laughter, but something clean and free. "That felt good," she admitted. "Looked good, too. Like watching a hawk defend her nest." Wade slipped an arm around her waist. "Sure you want to marry the town hermit last chance to run?" "I'm done running." She leaned into him. "Besides, someone needs to protect you from the moral society." "My hero," he said dryly, then sobered. "She won't be the last. There'll be others who disapprove." "Let them. We have what matters." The next morning dawned clear and warm. Spring in full glory. Mrs. Carlson arrived early with a basket of flowers and a smile that could have lit the cabin. "Don't you dare cry," she told Miriam firmly while helping her into her best dress, the blue one that matched the scarf. "You'll set me off. And then, where will we be?" "Both crying," Miriam said, already blinking back tears. "Exactly. Save it for after." The older woman's hands were gentle as she pinned flowers in Miriam's hair. "I'm so glad you sent that letter. So glad you found each other." "Even though the town disapproves." "Hang the town. Bunch of dried-up busybodies with nothing better to do than judge others." Mrs. Carlson stepped back to survey her work. "There. Beautiful." Miriam looked in the small mirror and hardly recognized herself. Not because of the flowers or the dress, but because of the joy that seemed to glow from within. She looked like a woman who'd chosen happiness. The ceremony was small, just Reverend Morrison, the Carlsons, and, surprisingly, Doc Winters and his wife. The old doctor had tended Wade's ribs once and declared anyone who could make Miriam Alcott smile like that deserved a medal. Wade waited by the cabin's front door, dressed in his best shirt and a new vest, Mrs. Carlson had insisted on. When he saw Miriam, his face did something that made her heart skip a softening, a wonder, like he was seeing sunrise after years of darkness. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Morrison began, and the words washed over Miriam like a blessing. This was real. This was happening. This careful, wounded man was choosing her, and she was choosing him back. When it came time for vows, Wade spoke clear and steady. "Miriam, you came into my life like spring after the longest winter. I promise to split your wood, weather your storms, and listen to your terrible singing for all my days. I promise to see you, truly see you, and love what I find. Always." Miriam had to swallow twice before she could speak. "Wade, you showed me that strength doesn't mean standing alone. I promise to share your silences and fill them when needed. I promise to be your partner in all things, to choose hope over fear, and to make you cornbread whenever you ask. I promise to stay." "The rings?" Reverend Morrison asked. They exchanged simple bands, nothing fancy, just plain gold that caught the light. As Wade slipped hers on, Miriam remembered that first day, how his hands had seemed so careful with the axe. They were careful now, too, holding her fingers like something precious. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Wade, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was sweet and brief, appropriate for witnesses but promising more. When they parted, Miriam saw her own joy reflected in Wade's amber eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Reverend Morrison said with a smile, "Mr. and Mrs. Wade Callahan." The small gathering erupted in congratulations. Mrs. Carlson did cry. "Mr." Carlson pumped Wade's hand enthusiastically, and Doc Winters declared it the best medicine he'd seen prescribed in years. As the sun set, their guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone on their porch. Wade had moved his few possessions into the addition that morning, making it official. Their cabin stood ready for its new chapter. "No regrets?" Miriam asked, leaning against her husband. Husband. The word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. "Only one," Wade said. "That it took me so long to find you." "We found each other when we were ready, not before." "Wise woman." He pulled out his harmonica. Request. Staying, she said immediately. Always staying. He played as stars emerged overhead, the melody floating across their clearing and into the woods. Miriam closed her eyes and let the music fill her, thinking of all the miles they'd both traveled to reach this moment. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled in the stove. Dishes from their wedding supper waited to be washed. Tomorrow there would be chores and challenges, gossip to weather and a life to build. But tonight, there was just this music and starlight and the solid presence of the man beside her. "I love you, Mrs. Callahan," Wade said when the last note faded. "And I love you, Mr. Callahan." They sat in comfortable silence, no longer needing words. The cabin that had once echoed with loneliness now held the quiet of companionship, of two souls who'd chosen to stop running. In the morning, they would wake to their new life. Wade would make coffee while Miriam burned the eggs. They'd work side by side building, planting, creating something neither could have managed alone. The town would whisper, but their disapproval mattered less than the chickens Wade planned to get, the garden Miriam would plant, the winter nights they'd weather together. Years from now, when Black Hollow told the story of the strange woman and the hermit who'd found each other, some would still shake their heads. But others, the ones who understood that love came in many forms, would smile and remember how Wade Callahan's music had changed, how Miriam's laughter had returned, how two damaged souls had built something whole. The cabin stood solid against the darkness, windows glowing with lamplight. Inside, a man played harmonica for his wife. She sang along badly, beautifully, freely. Neither of them alone anymore. Both of them. Finally, home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Miriam and Wade's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I love connecting with listeners from around the world and hearing your thoughts about these frontier tales. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these authentic tales of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. Until next time, partners.